Good morning, everybody. I invite you to find a place to be seated. I think there are plenty of spots to choose from, so please do. I can report to you that I'm your host again because Faith Benjuri continues on her leave for childcare. But she is returning on Monday, so we all look forward to welcoming her and at the appropriate time welcoming her new daughter. So that will be a good occasion for us. To begin today, I invite Reverend John Andreasen to bring us a prayer of thanks. John is just recently retired. He spent some years working with the Dakota Boys and Girls Ranch in Fargo, and prior to that, he was the president of the Oak Grove Lutheran Schools. He's one of our most faithful attendees at these luncheon events, so please welcome John Andreasen.
I invite you to join with me in prayer. Our gracious God, on this day and at this hour, when America pauses to honor its veterans, we thank you for the guidance you have given our founding fathers to chart the course for a democratic government. We thank you for the values enshrined in our Constitution and Bill of Rights, and for those men and women who have sacrificed greatly to protect and extend the freedoms we cherish. As we face tension and conflict, both globally and nationally, may we recognize your grace-filled presence in our midst. Give us both wisdom and passion to manage our own affairs as an expression of your will, promoting peace, establishing justice, and sharing your love. Inspire us to greater service through the message of those who share their insights with us this day. Bless the food we are about to receive and those who have brought it from the farm to the table. Be present in our conversation and strengthen us as workers in your kingdom. As we pray in the name of Jesus, our Savior and Lord. Amen. Enjoy the dinner.
This is, as was noted in the opening prayer, Veterans Day. And we have among us one veteran of World War II, Hiram Draki. Hiram Draki.
I was on the radio this morning and somebody said, what for?
He spoke in chapel on Wednesday, and if you go to the Concordia website and go to the chapel archives, you would be able to find a copy of his remarks. So I invite all of us on this Veterans Day to take a moment of silence as we remember veterans who have passed, as we honor veterans who are in our midst today, and as we extend support to those who currently protect and defend the rights and liberties that we have so lately exercised. Please join me. Thank you. Those of you who are regular attendees know from previous luncheons that Concordia is celebrating its 125th anniversary. And I think that the focus of today's program is really appropriate to a college that was founded by immigrants, that served as host to hundreds of immigrants in its early decades, a college that welcomed many refugees in the years following World War II, a college that sponsors the most diverse and interesting array of global languages, I think, of any institution probably on this continent, a college that encourages and supports students with multiple opportunities for global study, international awareness, and interfaith awareness. a college that welcomes students, faculty, and staff of increasing diversity to a metropolitan area of many languages, faiths, and hues. What could be more consistent for a college called to influence the affairs of the world than a program like ours today, which seeks to inform and understand the growing religious diversity in our community? Our host today is Dr. Michelle Lewica, professor of religion at Concordia, chair of the department, and the interim director on the Forum on Faith and Life. Dr. Lewica grew up in Staples, Minnesota. She attended the College of St. Benedict's and then did her graduate work at Harvard at the Harvard Divinity School. She joined our faculty in 2001. She is both an esteemed teacher and a recognized scholar. Her teaching and scholarship focus on women's studies, religious diversity, and religion and culture, among other things. Dr. Lewica will introduce our speakers and moderate the discussion that follows.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dovry. I'm here as the interim director of the Forum on Faith and Life, which is the office that sponsors our interfaith scholars, who you'll be hearing from today, and it's a pleasure to be here. Those of you who are familiar with Dr. Jacqueline Bussey, she is the one who normally directs the Forum on Faith and Life, and she is a difficult act to follow. So I appreciate being here, and I appreciate the opportunity to introduce the students. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Forum on Faith and Life, I'd like to read you just a part of its mission. And I'm going to read it slowly because it's so beautiful and so timely, I think. The Forum on Faith and Life aims to foster a deeper, more compassionate understanding of one another and our life together, in defiance of traditional boundaries and stereotypes that often hinder authentic relationships. Now, as I read this part of the mission, it's hard not to think about how absolutely relevant this mission is in these times of division and confusion and all kinds of feelings that have been unleashed in the past months and this week. So it's an honor to be part of an institution that is trying to educate students with skills and knowledge to help us through these kinds of times, our future leaders, like the ones you'll hear from today. One of the central ways the Forum on Faith and Life has sought to defy traditional boundaries and overcome stereotypes with compassion and understanding is through our efforts to promote interfaith understanding and cooperation. Now, in the religion department, where that's my home, we've been working on helping our students gain knowledge about religious diversity, diverse religions, and skills for dialoguing across those differences for decades. We especially started amplifying our efforts about interfaith in the wake of 9/11. Several years ago, Dr. Dovry had the wisdom to hire Dr. Jacqueline Bussey, who is the director of the Forum on Faith and Life, and who really took our interfaith efforts to a new level, gaining the college national recognition for our interfaith efforts, and Concordia is considered a leader in the nation for promoting dialogue, promoting understanding, and promoting cooperation among people from different faiths. And what's really especially significant about this is we're doing this not in spite of being a Lutheran college, but because we are a Lutheran college. And in that regard, I want to actually read you an interfaith cooperation statement that the college has officially adopted. The entire faculty as a whole endorsed this interfaith statement. And in it, you will hear that Concordia practices interfaith understanding because of its Lutheran identity, not in spite of it. So this is our statement. Concordia College practices interfaith cooperation because of its Lutheran dedication to prepare thoughtful and informed global citizens who foster wholeness and hope, build peace through understanding, and serve the world together. Now, as I mentioned, the interfaith scholars who you'll hear from today are part of the office of the Forum on Faith and Life. And the work that they're going to share with you is some groundbreaking research they did last year with the help of a Kemper grant. I really wish I could take credit for supervising them, but Dr. Bussey was their supervisor. I've just inherited their good work, and we're actually this year spending some time looking for ways to maybe build on the work they did and find ways to implement it. I'll say a little bit about each of our interfaith scholars. Medora Fry is from Bismarck, North Dakota. Do you want to stand up so they know who you are? Which one's Medora and which one's Rachel? This is Medora. Thank you. She's a senior religion major with an art minor, and she's both an interfaith scholar and a Phillips scholar. When she graduates this upcoming May, she intends to put her talents and passion to good use, pursuing a career in the nonprofit field. Rachel, our other interfaith scholar, is originally from Northfield, Minnesota. She's a senior global studies and religion double major with a minor in interfaith studies. I should also plug here that, I don't know if you know this, but Concordia is one of the first institutions in the country to have an interfaith studies minor. So if there's any question about the leadership role that we have and the potential we have to play an important role in bringing people together, that's a clue. After graduation this May, Rachel hopes to channel her passion for social justice and community organizing into a career that serves and protects the rights of vulnerable populations. This is Rachel's second year as an interfaith scholar and as co-president of Better Together, which is a student organization, again, dedicated to working on interfaith initiatives and interfaith cooperation. Rachel's been involved with Better Together since her first year here at Concordia. She also sings in the choir. So with that, please welcome our interfaith scholars. Sorry, one more thing I should mention. There will be time for Q&A, which I'll moderate. And so now I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, great. Hi. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for the invitation to come speak here. We're really grateful to have the chance to share the research we put so much time and love and effort into just this last year. Oh, closer to the mic? Okay, sorry. Thank you. So it's probably no secret to most of you that historically this is an area that has been demographically typically associated with more homogeneity than diversity in the past, the Fargo and Moorhead area. And potentially the only diversity present being various forms of Christianity. But within the last few decades, those demographics have dramatically begun to shift because North Dakota has some of the lowest unemployment rates in the nation. Many national social service organizations, such as Lutheran Social Services, understandably have sent a large number of immigrants and refugees to this state. Consistent growth in this population of new Americans from around the world has been one of the factors contributing to the growing diversity present in this community. Genuine diversity in cultural, ethnic, racial, and religious forms. Though it may surprise many to know it, with respect to religious diversity, the Fargo and Moorhead area has 3 synagogues, a thriving Hindu community, an active secular organization in the form of the Red River Free Thinkers, a prominent Baha'i organization, and roughly 6,000 practicing Muslims. These numbers continue to grow, especially as immigrant populations flock to this area for many reasons, not the least of which are the thriving economy and the excellent variety of job opportunities that this region is able to provide many different people in many different fields. So the Interfaith Scholars at Concordia College, we had the opportunity to conduct this research through a grant we received from the James S. Kemper Foundation with the Interfaith Youth Corps. Now, given the recent and continuing dramatic shifts in diversity demographics in the Fargo-Moorhead area, we found this research could not have been more relevant in order to better understand the level of awareness that local professional settings have of the diversity in our communities around us. So this was a grant that we received at the beginning of the last academic year, and this was research that we performed throughout the beginning of last year and through the middle of last year. What we found was that the more we can do to better understand the level of awareness that local professional settings have of this diversity, specifically with regard to religious diversity, we can better understand what, if any, strategies different workplaces are currently using to engage that diversity to positive and productive ends. From our research, we've begun to determine what skills, competencies, and knowledge our graduates need to be able to flourish in a pluralistic workplace and meet the needs of our religiously diverse community. Ultimately, our research findings will be used to help inform our curricular programs here at Concordia and potentially to help inform the way that we're developing different resources, potentially community professionals and other organizations can use to inform their workplaces about religious and cultural diversity among them. So I'll turn over to Medora. Thank you.
Hello. So like Rachel stated, in the fall of 2015, the Interfaith Scholars received this Kemper grant and through the Interfaith Youth Corps as well. And kind of what we did was conducted one-on-one interviews rather than sending out surveys and just kind of collecting some data. We really felt that having research that was one-on-one and interacting, human to human would be a lot better in producing really rich research and results that, that storytelling piece that was really important for our work. And so we found a lot of interesting things, but part of our research involved some questions, and I'll kind of, I think we had actually over like 20 questions, but I'll kind of read you the three main ones. So the first was, what specific skills and core competencies do you seek in future employees, especially with regard to cultural and religious diversity? Have you ever received any religious diversity training? And then if it were available, would you use it? And we actually interviewed some regional libraries, a manufacturing company, and then also, what is the third?
A local chain of a multinational
Hotel, yep.
Hotel organization or hotel company. So,
Yeah, sorry.
hospitality industry.
Yeah, and so with these interviews, it was extremely important that we kind of concluded our research in three main areas. So I'll let Rachel share the first conclusion here.
Yeah, so there were sort of three main conclusions that we drew from a lot of our research. And the first of those was that, without exception, we found every professional environment, every professional setting, every workplace is engaging religious diversity in some way. They're encountering it in some way, whether it's in the workforce among them, so in the form of colleagues and employees that are finding that their colleagues are more religiously diverse than they've known before, or also in the form of the clientele base that a lot of these companies are finding themselves needing to market themselves to. So after conducting nearly 20 hours of one-on-one interviews with employers and employees throughout the area with local businesses in Fargo and Moorhead, this one conclusion became really abundantly clear to us that people are encountering religious diversity and they're seeing really a need for literacy and context in the kind of diversity that they're engaging, that a lot of people feel sort of at a loss of maybe having the background knowledge to be knowledgeable about the beliefs or traditions or identities of the people around them, and are really seeing that need for knowing how to engage religious diversity.
So the second conclusion that we found and kind of came to was that there's also no formal religious diversity training offered anywhere, but it is desired. And so by having, these interviews, a lot of people were saying, we haven't had any training either, just in general related to diversity, but specifically religious diversity, but we really could benefit from it and use it, and it was all across the board. This is something that we really found. And so actually, in fact, all of the employees that we interviewed could not, recall having this training. But a lot of them had said that, their employers had trained them, to respect one another and that type of thing. But this deeper understanding was definitely needed. Mm-hmm. The only exception to this lack of formal diversity training was one of the regional libraries, where employees stated that the library brought in a speaker to talk with employees about homelessness and then also the socioeconomic diversity. And then also a local police officer had been brought to that same library to provide a cultural diversity training with regard to the new Americans that were in the area. But overall, the research concluded that the professional settings that we did investigate, no intentional, systematic, or sustained effort to help employees engage with that diversity in the workplace existed. To follow up on this finding, we pose the following question. If cultural and religious diversity training became available and was offered by Concordia or another source, would you make use of it? Remarkably, every single person we interviewed answered yes. One supervisor at the manufacturing plant replied to this question in this manner, quote, "Yeah, I think so. Having everybody educated as to the different needs and things like that in different cultures and religions is extremely important and can only help us understand each other and work together," end quote. Said one of the hotel managers, quote, "I think it would be helpful to us, maybe just in the classes teaching when all of those holidays for each different culture and religion are, and how to handle them and what they do for them," end quote. And a librarian replied to the question in this way, quote, "Yes, I think training would be beneficial, probably cultural and religious. I haven't thought of the two being separate before, so it would maybe be nice to know, with certain groups coming into the library, what would offend them, or be okay, or just be different," end quote.
So just to kind of summarize our conclusion, so again, the first conclusion we found was that every single environment that we conducted interviews at, everybody is encountering religious diversity. Currently, they don't have any training for it. No one has ever experienced any kind of deliberate cultural diversity training, let alone religious diversity training. And then our third and final conclusion that we found from all of the interviews that we gathered was to say that these religiously diverse workforces, because they truly are that, these workforces and the clientele bases that they're needing to accommodate and work with are increasingly diverse, and people are seeing that everywhere. That these workplaces are often a place where we're seeing religious diversity training happen in a really informal way, that these environments are becoming pluralistic in the sense that they're deliberately engaging this diversity to positive ends without the training, but more in a kind of on-the-ground learning as they go along, sometimes as a result of trial and error. So I think that was one of the more intriguing discoveries that we found, was that this sort of diversity training is happening, and the best training that employees and employers are currently receiving with regard to religious diversity is kind of the experiential learning that they're encountering, sort of the on-the-job training that's been organically occurring simply by working alongside religiously diverse coworkers and also working with a religiously diverse population. So through our interviews, we learned from employees that working in a religiously diverse workplace is tremendously educational in and of itself. It becomes kind of a crash course in interfaith literacy, as it were. So a high-level hotel manager that we interviewed posed it this way. He felt that employing religiously and culturally diverse employees was helping his organization to offer better hospitality to clientele, for one, who themselves are religiously and culturally diverse, and also to better inform his employees about the own limits of maybe their prior knowledge about religious diversity. So he noted it this way, quote, "In the hospitality industry, what we really look for are the ability for our employees to connect with guests. As a business hotel during the week and a leisure hotel on the weekends, we have quite a few guests coming in from all sorts of different backgrounds. So being able to connect with our guests is a key piece. So it's not just a transaction at the front desk. As a corporate culture, we really appreciate different cultures. Our staff is very multicultural, so we have that advantage in that I learn something every day from the people who I employ and the people who I work with. We have people of Vietnamese background, Somalian, Bosnian, Russian, so we have a deep pool of resources to draw from when it comes to interacting with different cultures, and we can use that when we're interacting with our guests." So these are just some examples of ways that people are really visibly noting the kind of religious and cultural diversity around them and seeing it as a positive thing, as a place where they can learn from each other and engage new tools to become more inclusive in their own workplace environments, but then also to be able to engage with the needs of an incredibly diverse community. So now we're kind of going to move to what we found were some best practices, because we asked about that too, about what strategies companies are now employing or have already kind of learned, again, through trial and error more than maybe prior deliberation, but have kind of learned this is something that works well for us. And then we'll also kind of point to some moments we have kind of lovingly referred to as interfaith fails. Just because they were moments of sincere learning, but sometimes at the cost of time and resources. But they were places of learning for a lot of these companies and businesses. So I'll start with one of my stories. Again, Medora and I, we conducted interviews at different places, so we sort of will jump back and forth based on who we talked to. So virtually everyone we interviewed said that they had never received any kind of religious diversity training, either in college, education, whatever education they'd had prior to working in that business, or else on the job, prior to kind of being thrown into whatever position they were working in. That kind of training is virtually non-existent. But we did find that the kind of training they do end up receiving is the experiential kind. We've mentioned this. Sort of this learn by doing, as a lot of them described, and some of that job learning included some missteps, which, again, we lovingly refer to as sort of those interfaith fails. So one story I have is from the hospitality industry site where I conducted a lot of my interviews. So this was a particular story from this hotel site. One executive housekeeper whose staff is made up largely of Somali Muslim women, and many of them are new Americans as well. She shared a number of stories about how her own lack of interreligious literacy had caused some on-the-job questions and sometimes challenges as well. So for one example, she was unaware of the Muslim practice of praying 5 times a day. She was surprised one day to stumble upon a housekeeper lying down the room she was cleaning as she did her prayers. And the executive housekeeper said, you know, having different housekeepers who need to pray 5 times a day, I had no idea what was going on. They would all of a sudden walk into a guest room and they'd be praying in that guest room as they were cleaning, and she would think, boy, what are you doing? She really didn't have the prior knowledge to really know what was going on there. And so once she found out, once they had that moment of communication, she had understood, oh, okay, that's something that it would be beneficial to the health of my employees if we were able to accommodate that, to provide a safe space where they feel comfortable communicating with me when that's a need of theirs, and that we can allow them to practice that and also have the communication so that we can function as a team effectively. So they made an arrangement where they would be able to go to an allocated room and close the door and have that privacy to practice their prayer 5 times a day, sort of at different times of day for each of the housekeeping staff. So they were able to maintain that kind of the work that they needed to do, but then also to have that communication and that trust there. Now, in another example, that same executive housekeeper was completely unaware of the Muslim month of Ramadan, in particular the celebration that occurs on the last day of Ramadan. That's called Eid al-Fitr, and it occurs at the end of the month of the practice of Ramadan and the practice of Islam. And so this was her first. She had kind of just come onto the job. She'd only been in her own position for a couple of months, and throughout the summer, a lot of her housekeeping staff were coming to her at different times and asking for a day off that was coming up. It was sort of in the future. She wasn't really paying a whole lot of attention to which day that was. Yeah, you kind of see where this is going. She ended up not realizing that she had given them all the same day off. And it wasn't until the last minute that she was aware of that. And so she ended up having to hire out to an expensive temp service to compensate for the fact that none of her staff would be in that day. And really what her takeaway from that situation was, first of all, she went on to Google and tried to figure out everything she could about Islam, sort of, main holidays that she would need to be aware of moving forward, and just tried to do a little bit of on-the-fly learning there. But then also what she took away from it was to say that communication that she wanted to have with her housekeeping staff, to say that she wanted to be able to value and appreciate their need to practice their own beliefs and their tradition, but also that she wouldn't be able to allow them to express those needs if there wasn't communication. So creating a sense of trust, that they could come to her and really express openly that this is a need that we collectively have, that we wish to practice and celebrate this day. Is there a way that we can arrange this to make sure that, that work doesn't stop at a standstill, but that we can still engage our identities that don't align with a Christocentric calendar, which is what most federal holidays and a lot of business holidays do center around. Another member of the hotel staff who works in the sales team mentioned that they market to a lot of celebrations, weddings, special events, and their big kind of multi-purpose space that they have, and their catering and their kitchens and the way that they put on these events, that they need to be able to cater to a diversity of needs, including dietary restrictions from the kitchen staff, kosher and halal, and being able to be representative of people's needs in that way. So that was something that the hotel manager and a lot of the sales staff acknowledged as saying that this is something we're seeing, and we don't necessarily have the literacy or the training to be able to engage this right off the bat. So we're looking for ways that we can learn about these things and create our own resources for them. But it's not something that's inherent in sort of those practices. And now, Medora, maybe you want to tell a story about what we found at some regional libraries.
Yeah, so one of the interesting conversations that I had at the library, actually, and one of the regional libraries, involved the library, as we stated kind of in our introduction and probably throughout, our area is becoming much more diverse. And so there's many new Americans coming in. And one of the things that the library really wanted to do was, to be helpful and engage with this diversity, was to create some financial literacy programs. And they thought, this is going to be very helpful. It's going to be a great tool for them to use. Well, what they decided to do was model, they came up with some brochures, and they modeled it off of the Federal Reserve, I believe, their Feed the Pig campaign, which, as we're in the business school, many of you probably know what those brochures look like, but for those of you that may not, it's generally something to do with a piggy bank, a pig, and putting, coins into this, which, yeah, some of you are laughing. Many traditions, but, Islam included, pigs are considered very unclean, and so it's a very big no-no to do that. And so the library actually ended up, they had printed these. They had printed hundreds of these, and they ended up needing to redo those completely. And so they used and wasted a lot of resources and time with that. And so that was kind of one of those interfaith fails that, with some background knowledge and some literacy prior, that could have definitely been avoided.
Yeah, so those were some interfaith fails that we noticed. We also did observe some really great practices that people were doing organically without, again, having had that training, but it just sort of learned on the fly that, oh, these are ways that we can sort of use our tools. So one of those came from the manufacturing company, which employs, I think, 80% of their workforce are new Americans. So much like the Somali women who work in the hotel, or like the program that the library was trying to cater to was catering specifically to new Americans. That's a huge demographic that I think most of that religious diversity is coming from. And so the manufacturing company, they developed a number of strategies kind of organically. One, a lot of their workers, so most of these workers who came from different faiths were working on the factory floor. So they're doing kind of that physical on-the-job labor. And what we found was, first of all, that the employees described that they were learning from each other as they were working on the job. That one employee actually described it. He said, every day coming here is like school, because he learned so much from his coworkers about their faiths and their traditions. One thing that they kind of organically developed was, there was one person who operates as a sort of liaison, an ombudsman, would be kind of a more official term, but he served as a sort of liaison between these religiously diverse groups and the upper management to say, here are some things that people are saying they could really use. So on special holidays that, again, aren't federal holidays or weren't Christian holidays, that these are holidays that people want to practice, they found a way to make sure that everybody could get to the mosque to pray, and that they took different shifts and they carpooled together in different kind of groups to make sure they were all able to practice in some degree, but again, that it was a compromise, a way to accommodate that religious need in sort of the way that business was going to operate. Another way that they did that was to allow for a separate room where those workers who were Muslim could pray safely and away from the factory floor. Prior to that, they'd been taking just sort of cardboard boxes and laying them down flat and laying them down sort of on the factory floor, which again was hazardous, and it really wasn't a safe thing for them. So they made a space and opened up just sort of a little supply clause had really cleared it out so that this was a space where people could come to, again, in shifts, so that they could still be accommodating to that religious practice and make sure it was safe for the employees, and also just sort of a very fluid part of the business environment. And again, I think the biggest takeaway there was that comfort of communication, that it's a lot easier, I think, for some of these workplaces when this diversity appears in numbers, that there's a whole group of people who can say collectively, yes, this is a need that we have that's not being met, and could we do something about that? In workplaces where religious diversity is maybe more sparse, or just sort of one or two here and there in between with different needs, that communication, I think, has to be more explicit from the upper management to say that we need you to tell us what your needs are, because we often lack the literacy to be able to engage it prior to that. So I think that there's sort of that, what we found a lot was there's that humility in the upper management to say, boy, there's a lot we don't know. And for something, one of the most effective tools was to have that trust, that communication, have that be really explicit, and make sure that people felt like their management was a resource for them, that they could have that need met. Yeah. So I guess we're kind of coming up on where we'd love to do some question and answer, but we do have just sort of a couple of concluding remarks. And do you want to start, or I guess I could just sort of start? Well, yeah. So we've talked about a lot of these things. We've touched on a lot of our major conclusions, but really what we observed is that within workplace environments where more religious diversity is present, employees also exhibited more religious literacy. That diversity kind of yielded a greater sense of awareness of people, of saying that, you know, here's sort of the limitations of my knowledge, here's what I would love to learn, and it would be really great if I had had the training prior to this, so that I would have been more prepared for a religiously diverse workplace and client base. So what we found was that lack of literacy, but then also a really sincere craving and a really sincere desire to have greater knowledge and literacy. Most interviewees expressed that they understood the importance and the relevance of this kind of literacy and competency in the workplace, because they encountered it every single day as a part of working with their colleagues and working with their clients. So we observed that in workplace settings where there was maybe less significant diversity present among staff, employees had significantly less experience in encountering and engaging diversity of all kinds, whether that was racial diversity, ethnic, cultural, religious, that in workplaces that were less diverse, people felt less comfortable engaging in religious diversity, and they knew a whole lot less as well. So even though a pluralistic workplace presents challenges and adjustments, the majority of employees whom we interviewed felt that it also provided many benefits. These employers and employees considered workplace diversity an asset rather than a liability. For example, a department manager at the manufacturing plant, which is extraordinarily diverse as a, you know, in sort of in the spectrum of all the businesses that we saw, it concluded that religious diversity was a part of the workplace culture that really strengthened their sense of belonging to one another, and also strengthened the creativity of that company, their ability for individual workers to adapt to their situations.
And in our assessment, we found that the workplace is the single place where all individuals in the Fargo-Moorhead community are being consistently brought into direct encounter with the city's growing diversity, and where there's also limitless potential for individuals to engage that diversity to positive ends. Because employees in the workplace share with their colleagues that common goal, so those skills and those very specific skills to their jobs, and their organizational mission, professional environments are exactly those places where individuals are required not only to encounter other individuals from diverse backgrounds, but also to engage with that diversity. So in other words, the workplace environments provide a setting where collaboration is simply not encouraged, but it's also essential. It's really a necessity. So these stories of collaboration and learning at each of the sites powerfully demonstrate that regardless of the field of work, positive and informed engagement with that diversity plays a critical role in the success of all businesses and professional settings, and shaping how they meet the needs of their clientele and also their employees.
Yeah. So I think just to kind of reiterate where Medora and I are sort of coming from this too. So as a religion and global studies double major with our new minor in interfaith studies, I really feel that the field of interfaith studies as an academic discipline has been invaluable to me. It's been critical to my education here at Concordia because I am convinced that I cannot be a responsible global citizen without it. And as someone hoping to move into the field of public policy or foreign policy, I'm not really sure what that means yet, like most seniors. I know that this knowledge base will really impact my preparedness in whatever field I choose to go into, especially for positively and informedly engaging whatever diversity I find around me. And there is plenty of it, and it's only going to be increasing in the world we see around us. And I feel now more than ever that interreligious literacy and intercultural competency are an absolute necessity for engaging in the world around us. Learning from one another about our different identities fosters compassionate understanding. And it teaches us how we can interact across difference of ideology and also of identity.
And as a religion and art major, I also find it, also essential, to my education at Concordia. It's been one of the most interesting, part of my studies for me personally. I hope to pursue a career either in art therapy or nonprofit work. And even now, as a student, every day we're engaging with people that are different from us, the other. And so it's essential. It's extremely important. And I also appreciate from Concordia this hands-on, learning experience. We're able, Rachel and I last year were able to go and have these one-on-one interviews, and learn from people and actually meet with them and hear their stories. And that's been, an incredible experience, and I'm very grateful to Concordia, for that. And I think it's also important, as we think about religious, also non-religious perspectives and kind of how that interplays as well. That's maybe something we should have mentioned right away, but that's been extremely important. As well. And so in order to effectively engage that diversity in the workforce, I think it is imperative to have that, that broadened knowledge base in order to effectively work with the people around you.
Yeah, so we'd just like to thank you all for having us here today. For any questions you might have, we're hoping to expand on this research too. Again, we saw such a desire for some kind of tools and techniques we might be able to start to work on, to provide. So that's really what we're working on next, is to see if there are ways that we can develop a module that could maybe introduce religious and cultural diversity training into these work environments. So that's sort of what our goal is this year, to expand on this research now. But thank you so much for your time. Thanks for having us. Do it.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
This is so interesting. I've read their report, and hearing it again just brings up all of the interesting and intriguing and significant findings that you have uncovered. Questions? Alexander?
Hi. So
Hi.
first of all, really amazing work. So thank you very much for sharing with us. I was very interested in what I call visualization, because I'm thinking the different amazing work you're doing from the managerial standpoint of how to educate them, how to expose them. What's the next somewhat long-term goals? Is there any of them mention any empowerment training for them to now have those new Americans, those diversity religious people have now maybe certain higher up roles, so it could be some kind of, you believe in what you see, right? So if you see someone in a certain role that looks like shares your personal background, it really instills that sense of, oh, I feel safe here, I feel understood. So what's the, how you say you have to work so many miles in the shoes of, there's so much you can think for someone else until this person is actually you. So were they talking about what I guess in the 50s women would call glass ceiling, kind of how do you break it? So now for the new American religious background, what's their glass ceiling? I mean, I was thinking in your future research as well, if it was something you touched on.
Yeah, so maybe initiatives that different companies are employing to, closer to the mic. Okay, sorry. Different initiative companies are using to sort of empower different employees to step into higher leadership positions. I think that it really was unique to the specific sites we saw. So there were, again, we conducted research in different places. In places like the library, that's maybe something that's less prominent, but in corporate businesses, especially sort of thinking of climbing that ladder. I do know at the hotel chain where we conducted interviews, they did mention, and I'm trying to think all the way back to last fall, but they did mention ways that they have different training programs available to their employees that are not specific to religious or cultural diversity. They're specific to job skills and professional development. That those are things they want to empower their employees to take advantage of. Those are resources that that the corporation they're a part of has kind of instilled as a part of the company mentality of this is something that we really want to employ. I think what we saw too, especially at that site in particular, I know a lot of because a lot of their diverse staff were new Americans. A lot of them were also maybe recent transplants to the area, and also a lot of them were coming in at entry-level positions. So I think that those are sort of in the early stages of that, and I would hope that the dynamic of the companies, I think, really determine whether or not they're going to provide tools that are empowering their employees in that way. So different sites we saw, it was really heartening to see that there was a sincere commitment to, first of all, engaging, making it clear that even if they didn't have religious or diversity training, they did have training that made it really explicit that a part of our company identity is kindness and respect and making sure that everybody here feels welcome regardless of identity. So that kind of having that backbone, I think, that sort of dynamic that's really explicit in that company, and from a corporate standpoint, really, from that basis, that I think that's going to shape the way that employees, A, feel comfortable speaking out when they feel they have needs that are not being met, going to their supervisors to look for ways that they can continue their professional development, and then seeking out different advancement.
Thanks, Medora and Rachel. I'm over here.
Hi. I was like, I hear a voice.
I appreciate your comments, and I'm really curious about the next steps with training potential, and two kinds of questions. One is, in your research, you were talking largely to employers. Is that correct? And did you actually talk to the employees as well?
Yeah.
Okay. So getting their feedback about what they would like their employers to know about their particular traditions. And then the second comment and question is that we have I have an alum that I work with who is very involved in online professional development, and so as you're considering, the future of a training session, you might want to think about that. A number of the largest companies are using online professional development. What would that look like? Which seems a little bit counterintuitive almost to this relational kind of interaction that seems to be productive in fostering an understanding of diversity, but at the same time, it is kind of the venue that a lot of employers are using for delivering professional development.
Yeah.
I think both are, just brief, I think both are extremely important, and especially I think with that online piece, that's a really great way to, what does someone that is Baha'i, like what are some of their customs or beliefs that, for me at least, I would think that might be a really good starting point to just learn about those differences. And then, those one-on-one interactions of, okay, well, what does this mean? Like, how do you actually live that out? So to me, I think both are really good ideas and important in kind of how we continue with, with this training and how we develop that. So yeah, thank you.
So my question is for Mike, sitting over here, Mike Engstrom, who's the director of Cardinal Glass, and over 2/3 of their employees are new Americans. And I want to know, how does this report resonate with your experience at Cardinal?
Well, it's pretty closely related, considering that we are the manufacturing firm that they did their study on. So, so obviously, many of the scenarios that they were talking about, they were referring to Cardinal. I was just thinking, is this, they said training may be a shortcoming, and maybe we need to do some religious diversity training and cultural training during our onboarding process as we bring new employees on. We are very diverse. We have people from 31 different countries working for us from probably half dozen religions. So I'm wondering what this training might look like. And then I go back to either Marty or I start our onboarding process off discussing our values, our plant values, our values of family, safety, teamwork, excellence, and respect. And especially the bookend values, family and respect, really resonate with cultural diversity. And I think it's just so important that if we treat each other as if we are part of the same family and treat everyone with respect, it's not really important that we know everything about every culture. And then the experiential learning that goes along with working in a diverse team, you will learn those things over the course of time. So I don't know, I'm sure we'll be thinking about this more at Cardinal as to how we might involve some diversity training. I'm really looking forward to Medora and Rachel's follow-on project that's going to tell me how to do this.
Yeah. And just to comment on, I think that really is something we found consistently too, having that backbone of the expectation that we are holding ourselves to treating one another with respect, with compassion, with the willingness to engage those identities in regardless of what our background is. And that, I think, was something that we saw at other sites too. I mentioned the hotel chain as well, and that even if they didn't have any sort of specific ways, and again, you mentioned that there's so much diversity, it's hard to kind of pinpoint, well, what diversity are we going to focus on? What stories are we going to tell and say that these are the facts and figures you need to know, that sort of thing, that without those specifics, what companies can already be doing is to establish kind of that sense of welcoming and belonging, and just sort of an articulation of, we want to communicate with you about what your needs are, because we may not know them, and also we're going to treat one another with respect and as a family. So yeah, I really appreciate those comments.
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions? One over there. And while the mic is traveling, I just also want to affirm what you're saying about respect. In the interfaith studies field, there's talk about knowledge about religious differences, and that's the literacy piece, but there's also talk about skills and having all the knowledge in the world about religious diversity, which, by the way, it would take a lifetime to acquire, is no good if you don't have skills. And it sounds like you're really cultivating a culture where the skills for dialogue can be cultivated with that respect. So I really appreciate what you said.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, I'm a full-blooded German, so you know where I'm coming from. But I have been commissioned to write a book by someone who wants me to prove that there's something distinctively innovative among Norwegians. Have you come across anything like that at all?
I'm full-blooded German, so I can't comment.
I'm a mix of all. I'm Swedish and Norwegian and German and French and English. So I got a lot of things pulling.
I just wondered, because the person is quite obsessed by the fact that he thinks that there's something unique among the Norwegians that have made them so creative.
I don't know about that.
Nothing? You haven't dug into that at all?
We haven't. No, that's
Next area.
yeah.
One of the, if I may just interject, one of the interesting things that happens when you start studying religious diversity is you find that there are common threads that connect diverse religions, diverse spiritual traditions with each other, but there's also diversity within each tradition. And that diversity within is also just a rich field. You didn't have time to get into that, and that wasn't a part of your research, but I know it's a part of a lot of what you've been thinking about in your years at Concordia. And so there's discussion of religious diversity among religions, but also diversity within. And that's also a rich and sometimes even more difficult territory to explore, if you know what I mean. So I think we need to wrap up here. I want to give us the opportunity to thank again our fantastic interfaith scholars. Thank you so much. Dr. Dovry has a few closing things to say.
Sure, just take a-
Well, thanks to Rachel and Medora, and also to you, Michelle, for serving as our host, and thank you, Mike, for adding to the substance of this conversation. I knew about the work out there, and I was just eager to have someone like you speak to us as you did today. This is a really exciting enterprise that's going on here, something I think that will be of increasing importance to our community as we become more diverse and as we learn to work together effectively and in this community. President Kraft arrived, and there he is, about to leave. But thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us, Bill. And a few closing comments from Dean Brewer-Doran, Dean of the Office School of Business.
Thank you. I love Concordia students. I am so impressed by what you have done. And I'm reminded, since he's still in the back of the room, that right after the election, President Kraft wrote to the community, and in part, he said, quote, "As heirs of a college founded by immigrants seeking a life of faith and learning in a new country, we honor the worth of every human soul, and we reject every call from any political quarter that would demean or diminish that worth. We must be stewards of the world that God created and called good," end quote. Clearly, Rachel and Medora understand this. Celebrating diversity while finding common ground is a deeply held tenet of Concordia. As we've seen, people of faith, whatever faith, can create richness and strengthen organizations. As Rachel and Medora pointed out, exposure, engagement, and experience can help. But they also showed us the need for intentionality in doing so. We need to celebrate similarities, as Mike noticed, as well as differences. Have trust and find creative ways to accommodate each other. Thank you for joining us on this Veterans Day as we thank our servicemen and women for their dedication and sacrifice for our country and for all of us. The Lorentzsen Luncheon series is taking a break throughout the holiday period, but we'll be back in the spring term. Please join us February 10th to hear Vern Dosch, President and CEO of the National Information Solutions Cooperative. Mr. Dosch will be speaking about faith and leadership, particularly how he integrates his own faith into his business leadership and the values that guide the cooperative that he leads. Finally, I'd like to thank our events manager, Carol Hedberg, for making sure today's event went off without a hitch. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in February.